Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar from the Book Industry Study Group, Can AI Be Useful in Book Translation? It's a presentation and a conversation that Thad McElroy, both our friend and our leader when it comes to discussions of AI, has put together with a couple of folks, Robert Karsten Karlberg and Leanpub. Thad, I'm going to start with you, I think, and you can kind of walk through some of the high-level thinking that you have around AI in book translation. Then we're going to have a perspective from Robert and from Len. For everybody who's on the webinar, I encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A tab that's part of the control screen, typically at the bottom of your Zoom interface. You can also add it to chat. It's a little bit easier to track it in the Q&A, so we prefer that you do that. Please do add questions as you go. We'll be coming back to them probably in the last third or quarter of the presentation of the hour today. So with that, Thad, thank you for putting this together, and take it away.
Great. Thanks very much, Brian. And thanks to Brooke Horn, also at BISG. Couldn't do it without the two of you, and have really appreciated BISG's support in this small series. This is the second of a two-part series on conversations around AI. Last month, we looked at whether AI could be detected in writing. Today, we'll look at book translation and AI. We're then going to take July and August off and figure out how to put together a new series starting in September, so stay tuned for that. This is growing. This series, this short series, has been an outgrowth from an activity within Book Industry Study Group, which is an AI committee within the Workflow Working Group. So it's, as far as I can see, sort of the first publishing industry initiative to start to look at AI and its impacts on book publishing. So I feel it's very valuable in that regard. Well, let's go on to today's program. I'll take you through some slides. Ordinarily, once before, we did it just as a panel discussion. As I was approaching this one, I thought, wow, there's a lot of complex issues, a lot of nuanced issues that have to be considered and discussed. So I'm going to start off with the slides, and then we'll move into a conversation with our panelists today. Slides. Good. So, this is not the final word. It's not the definitive word. You'll see very shortly that the complexity of AI in book translation is exceptional, and we'd have to have a full day program to really pin down the beast. So what we're going to do in this hour is give you a glimpse of the issues, a look at what's coming, because it's coming on very, very quickly, as with so many other things with AI, but not the definitive word. It's a discussion. We have 4 people today, of which one is in absentia, but I'm going to, I'd had a conversation with her. The first speaker, Andy Benzo, she's the president-elect at the American Translators Association, a real dynamo, but she at the very last minute got called off for a family emergency. But we had a chat last week, and I'll just share a few of the things we talked about. But then we also have here Robert Karsten Karlberg, who runs a translation agency in Stockholm, and also Leanpub, who's co-founder of Leanpub, and I'll explain where Leanpub fits into the picture shortly. I realized last time that I just sort of assume people know who I am, which is an improper assumption. So just a few little things on AI. I started studying it back in 1987, of all things, where at that point I was working looking at publishing automation, and I thought AI might have some promise. It didn't, and so I put that off to the side. Since then, I continued to focus on digitization and automation again, looked at metadata, became quite obsessed with that for a while, and still have that on my radar. I spent a lot of time understanding recommender systems, such as Amazon uses, and then computational linguistics, which is very much a part of what the current generation of AI is. But then I jumped in with both feet when ChatGPT launched in November 22. I worked with Publishers Weekly as a contributing editor covering publishing innovation, and I've got a new book coming on AI. So going to use that as a segue, because it's relevant to our discussion today. The book is coming out in July 9th, AI Revolution in Book Publishing. And what's going to be quite different about it, I'll show you in the next slide. The way I'm looking at AI in the context of book publishing is in the context of accessibility. And, you know, partly, of course, it's accessibility in the formal sense for print disabled readers, but I also think of it as accessibility in an age of print distracted readers. And increasingly, my feeling is that we have to go where the readers are, and we have to make our creative works available to them in whatever format people prefer to consume in. And so, you know, at this point, you know, we think, oh, an ebook, an audiobook, and a print book, that's, you know, that's the range. Within that, I'd say, you know, 2 ebook files, right? EPUB and PDF. A lot of people prefer PDF. So it's appropriate to have both versions. I'm also going to have an online web version for those who prefer to read the book on the web. There'll be an accessible version that way. But then the real accessibility in the AI sense starts to come in next, where the book will be translated into 31 languages. It'll be in a total of 32 languages. We'll look deeper into how that's done, simultaneous translation of the book into all those languages. And also the audiobook is going to be in 3 languages, minimum: Spanish, French, and German. I'm also looking at doing English dialects as a new approach to audiobooks. So all of this is, you know, made possible by AI and would not be possible in any realistic way otherwise. When it comes to, you know, talking about translation, I got really sort of pushed into it last fall at Frankfurt when I did a session there. And preparing for that session, you know, everyone sort of thinks, well, I understand translation, you know, take a book, put it in another language, and end of story. But when you start to study what's going on around translation, you find out that the issues are tremendously complex and nuanced between language and cultures and history, and issues about creativity, and on and on and on. And so it's you know, it's not a monolingual conversation. And when I looked at translation as an industry, which indeed it's an enormous industry of long-standing. That's another thing that people don't realize, is that AI and translation, you know, is decades old. Machine translation has been around a long time. It's the ChatGPT and LLM-based AI technologies that are really leading to a new renaissance in translation. When we talk about translation, there's a lot of different categories. I throw up some things on the slide there: creative, technical, scientific, corporate, and then thinking at the textual level, the referential level, the cohesive level, the naturalness level. And then the type of translation: is it word for word, literal, faithful, communicative, semantic translation, an adaptation, free translation? So there's no sort of simple, just go translate that book. And then, you know, when we get into publishing, there's another nuance that we need to consider. And it's, you know, it's the difference between translating fiction and nonfiction. And I throw some, you know, very broad generalizations there, where I'm saying fiction is style over substance, flow versus facts. You know, it's the reality that we're nonfiction, where the facts can be, and generally are, you know, quite essential to the text. In fiction, it's more the flow of the words over the page, rather than any specific moment that needs to necessarily be captured with great precision. Though we'll look at that a bit more in just a moment. But I think one of the things that I want to talk to one of our panelists, Len, about, and Robert, is, you know, as I'm looking at the way these large language models work, I'm thinking they are excellent stylists, but they're not great fact checkers. You know, we hear about the hallucinations. It's a real issue. It's an ongoing issue. And hallucinations seem to appear most often when you treat these GPT interfaces as if they were search engines, as if you could sort of delve down and get, you know, factfulness from them. It's not what they were designed for. And so we'll see what their absolute applicability to the translation challenges are. And, you know, within fiction categories, and, you know, not all fiction is so-called literary. Do we break it up commercial versus literary? Another person I spoke to calls it popularity versus prestige, which leads to the elephant in the room: literary translation. And this is where the conversation really polarizes and concentrates and polarizes. looking at this, last week in San Francisco, there was an opera that I attended called Innocence. It's a harrowing night at the opera. But what was extraordinary about it is that it's presented in 9 languages. I'd never seen an opera do that. It's an opera very much about a dysfunctional family. And that led me to remembering something else that I encountered a year or so ago in terms of the nuance of literary translation and the degree of precision that is often called upon. So here's an example from another dysfunctional family. The first line in Anna Karenina for Tolstoy is usually translated as all happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. And people have heard that repeated many, many times. Then in 2014, Marion Schwartz did a new translation, and she was quite emphatic on this point. Tolstoy said not that happy families are alike, but rather that they resemble one another. And so she used alike, dropped alike, went with resemble in that first opening of the book. And when you get to that and you think about that degree of concern over a single word or a single phrase, well, to throw AI up against that, it's going to lose that battle for certain. Now, another battle it would lose is if it took on this particular book, Elliot Weinberger, this wonderful, wonderful book, 19 Ways of Looking at Wang Wei. This little poem that you see on the screen is the original Chinese, written in 700 AD. And the book contains, it says 19 translations. In fact, they added an appendix to it, and we're up to 29 translations in the book. The author, Weinberger, he critiques each and every one of the translations, but they all run along the same lines as the one you're seeing there on the screen. Mountain is empty, human, sunlight, green moss. When I threw that poem into an AI engine, the new Claude 3.5 that just came out this past week, I guess, a week ago, it translates it in a slightly more poetic way. Dear fence, silent hills, no soul in sight, yet whispers linger in the air. Dusk's glow pierces the shadowed grove, kissing emerald moss with golden light. And you think, well, that's quite an interesting stylized version of a translation of a poem that's been translated a great many ways, but it doesn't seem unacceptable, perhaps. And it gets better. 2 weeks ago, I found out about, I think it's about a year-old announcement, but I only discovered as I was preparing for this webinar, Meta, Facebook, who are doing a lot of work in the translation sphere, as are all the big LLM companies. They've come up with a model that does 200 languages. 200 languages, not just English to 200, but 200 in and amongst themselves. It's just an exceptional achievement. I put in URLs on various of these slides. There's a few slides that I'm not even going to show today. So by all means, when we post the webinar in a week, download the slides and you've got all the URLs there.
I'm really hoping that you'll be able to join us on June 25th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for our wonderful webinar looking at AI and the translation of book. Realmente espero que puedan unirse a nosotros el 25 de junio a la 1 de la tarde, hora del este, para nuestro maravilloso webinar, mirando la inteligencia artificial y la traducción de libros.
So that's using some of the Meta translation technology where it just on the fly can go into multiple languages, a video, plus track. Again, exceptional. The things are moving forward so quickly. When we talk about technology, I always sort of use the pick two notion that when you look at a new technology coming on and put it up against what it's trying to replace or to augment, you say, is it better, is it cheaper, is it faster? Pick two. It's almost impossible to get all three. If you've only got one, you may not want to adopt it. When we come to AI, as it can be utilized for book translation, is it better? No, it's not better. Is it cheaper? An awful lot cheaper. Is it faster? So much faster. So that's pretty interesting in the value equation. But at the same time, what people are talking about the translation industry is not an industry. I mean, it is in some sense, but it's a very small modest industry. The only data I could find was that there were 9,500 book translations last year, 9,500 out of how many books published worldwide. And then in one other data point I could find was last year again, English to Spanish, a total of just over 7,200 translations. So if that's the pot as it exists now, just think what the opportunity is of all of these other books that have not been translated. I have to, put up a single slide, a big single slide about job loss, because clearly that's on everyone's mind, and as it well should be. And you want to try and soft pedal it and say, oh no, it's going to be bigger and better somehow. But certainly there has to be certainly job dislocation, disruption. There's bound to be some job loss. I think there'll be a lot of growth. And Robert, who has a significant number of staff and freelancers that he works with, can talk about what he sees as the impact of jobs. But we can't, steer away from that issue. It's going to be on the table. So Andy Benzo, who was unable to join us today, very, very interesting character. I hope we'll have her on a future webinar. Her background and understanding is really, really amazing. But a couple of points she made. One of the big things she wanted me to share is that there's a new standard from the Standards Organization, ASTM, and they're proposing so-called consumer protection labels for translations. The one would be BRT, bilingually reviewed translation, and then UMT, unedited machine translation, as the two potential, the two possible labels that could go onto a piece of machine translated content. So that, I gather that's a standard or a designation still in discussion. I don't know that it's been decided as a formal proposal. And she made a few other points that I put there on the slide. She's born in Argentina. I spoke to her in Italy last week. And when you speak to someone, from cultures other than our own, you're always struck by how much deeper their involvement is in culture as a presence in their lives. And she says, translators are ambassadors of culture. And indeed, when I spoke to her, she was a very fine ambassador of culture. She says in the US, the idea of translation is very different than it is in Argentina. There, it's a profession, and here it's the implication was here it's more of a mechanical task, not a true cultural profession. But she says we're in very muddy waters, and made two interesting points where she's considering the impact of AI on technology. She said, for example, accountants don't have to disclose that they use QuickBooks. And yet, of course, they use QuickBooks in their accounting. So is this something where the translator needs to disclose that they're using certain tools? See our webinar from last month for further thinking around that. And she said, you go to the doctor and you expect your doctor to be using the latest technology. You wouldn't want to go to a doctor that wasn't employing the best available technology. So is there some analogy here with the way translation should be applied, AI translation, to the craft that as we know it? Now, two things here. Len, one of our panelists, I just wanted to show this slide because we're not going to have many more slides after this. This is a screenshot of the service that Leanpub offers with the 31 books on you can see on a single web page on the Leanpub platform. One of the things that should be in the back of your mind is, if you have 32 versions of a book, right now, the way the e-commerce systems are set up, you then need 32 separate listings. I approached Google about translating my audiobook, and they said, we can't do multiple translations. We can only do single, 1, 2, 3. They each need a separate page. With Leanpub, you can get them all on one page. We'll talk more about that with Len in a moment. But then our next speaker is Robert Casting Karlberg, and he runs this agency, as I mentioned, in Stockholm. And we want to start to drill down on his lived experience, as it were, with AI and technology. So let me stop the slides. Good. That's good. Robert's there. So Robert, let's just start off with a sort of once over description of what your agency is and how it works.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So my name is Robert. What we do at Nuanced is that we basically project manage translations for the traditional publishing houses. So working with translator, editors, and proofreaders. We translate about 50, 60 books a month, 95% fiction, mostly commercial fiction, to 10 languages. We've done 60 language combinations, mostly between the European languages. So that's one thing. And I usually say that we do two things. One is that we try to work with skilled and experienced translators, editors, and proofreaders. And the second part is that we're also a technology company. So we build the tools that they actually work with. So we imply a hybrid translation process, basically, that includes AI before, during, and after they are translating, basically so they can spend fewer hours on the translation. And that way it's kind of passing economics along to the publishers while still making it faster, and also be able to give a good market rate to these linguists who are translating. So back to your point in the beginning, Thad, about job loss, what we argue is that this actually creates more work because most books don't get translated because the equation doesn't add up for the publisher to dare to do it.
Yeah. But so let's focus on the AI technology for a couple minutes. Talk more about what AI tech you employ and how it fits into the workflow.
Right. So what we have done is that we built basically the tool that the translators themselves spend the time working in and the project manager around that. And that connects to all of the big kind of providers that out there. And they are different. They are good towards different language combinations. And then we actually start from a pure machine translation, then we then edit upon in multiple steps to a quality that we then deliver to the client that should be good enough that they don't have to typeset, or they can send it straight to typesetting or narration or kind of audiobook creation or ebook creation without any other language kind of proofing.
Are you using each and all of the language models or favoring a particular one?
So it's very different from different. We test them continuously, and I would say that they differ quite a lot, especially when you go outside the direct to English for how good they are. But we also kind of fine tune these models to do. I think I gave you an example while we talked. Like in Swedish, we have a lot of hyphens, and we want to translate something into English that have quotation marks first and after. And no one really likes fixing quotation marks. So if we can kind of fine tune a model that fixes all of the quotation marks, the first one is, of course, find replace, but the last one you have to place somewhere correctly. And if you can do that, you save a few hours for the translator, basically. Right. So we have a lot of those small things that sound small, but they kind of add up as you go.
Yeah. Let's talk about the publishers and their attitudes to the work you're doing and the kind of conversations you're having with the publishers, given that the topic's a sensitive one.
It's a big one to unpack, but I think in general, most publishers we start working with are very skeptical to the way we are working, but they realize that once they've tried it, that the quality is good and the readers really like it. We check out all the reviews, and they are kind of all growing their orders, so the authors like it. I think then you have the publishers who are probably more skeptical, and especially the translators. If you look at the publishers, it's a lot about the rights, of course. I mean, we ensure that whatever we use don't get used for training any of the big models, which is a very important point for a lot of publishers and us as well. And for the translator point of view, it is a different way of working. But our experience is that once they see this way of working and working the way we do, they quite like it. And it's a different way, but as we said, I think it will bring a lot more jobs to this small industry and create more books to be translated, albeit in a different way.
It certainly looks like it from the numbers I was showing. I mean, it's just a tiny fraction of what could be translated that's being translated. So from that perspective, a lot more work would seem a reasonable expectation.
exactly. Just to continue on that point, I think what gets translated today in general, I would argue, is kind of the obvious bestsellers, the Harry Potters of the world, and the passion projects. But there's a lot of authors who will never get translated because there's no one who dares to take a bet on them. And that's where we want to come in and help out.
What do you see as the typical, if there is a typical number of languages that a book gets translated into, when you consider there's hundreds that there could be, how many usually might there be?
I think it comes back to cultural nuances. I don't think this spray and pray approach, if you want to call it that, with all respect, works that well. I think it's about understanding which title translate well into what language. And that's a lot of the publishers' experience and expertise knowing that.
Yeah. And talking, if you could, about the differences of use of AI for nonfiction versus fiction.
Sorry, come again?
The use of AI, how applicable it is, or how different the applicability might be when you have a nonfiction you do 95% fiction, but you've encountered the use of it for nonfiction as well. Do you see a difference in its utility?
No, I think it comes back to the translator to a large extent. Especially going into nonfiction, you have to know the subject matter in order to understand if it makes sense or not. But at the same time, as the fiction part is also very important to understand the subject matter, even though it's much more nuanced and understanding how meaning translates in cultural contexts. So I think it's a bit too easy of a generalization, that one. But of course, if you do something very content specific, domain specific, then you have to understand what you're doing, of course. Otherwise, it won't work. That's for nonfiction.
The name of your agency, describe how that was brought together, the two words.
Yeah, exactly. So our name is Nuanced with an X. So it's a composition of nuance and editing. So that's what we're doing, nuanced editing.
That's great. Let's talk to Len for a few minutes here. Welcome, Len.
Hi.
You're in Saskatoon.
Yes, I am.
That's great. So tell us about the Leanpub platform. First, let's talk in broad strokes, and then we'll talk about the translation program.
Yeah, sure. So Leanpub is a platform for writing and self-publishing books. It's our motto that was on one of that slides earlier is publish early, publish often. And so what we encourage people to do is start publishing their book, 2 or 3 chapters in, and then add chapters as they go, with people who've already got the book, getting the new chapters for free as they go. This model has proven particularly popular with people who are writing about changing technologies. Our sort of origin story is my co-founder Peter published a book on a programming language that changed the day the book came out. And so you can imagine if I could just go into my manuscript and sort of do a find replace for the sort of like little bit that changed, that would be a great solution. And so that was the sort of origin of our platform.
And that's what worked for me, and what attracted me to Leanpub initially is when I started to consider doing a book on AI. The first thing everyone said was, that's ridiculous because it's changing so quickly. And that was like, yeah, you're right. I can't do a book. It's changing far too quickly. And then I remembered our earlier conversations, and I came to you and to Peter, and it's a perfect way. So I released the book first at 75%. I haven't gone with multiple iterations yet. I'm going to 100% in July, but then I can intend to continue to update the book and send out notices the way you described. So then I learned from you and from Peter about your translation program. And so tell us about that.
Yeah, so this is going to get a little bit technical, but Leanpub book manuscripts are written in plain text. So all software programs are strings of characters. That's why software programmers are sitting at keyboards. They're typing out texts. And so Leanpub book manuscripts are written in the same format that programs are written in.
Now just there for a second, because your authors also can use Microsoft Word.
So yes, so what people can do is they can write in Microsoft Word, but then there's an import process that has to convert it into our plain text format.
Yeah, and then
and so then once it's converted, you can imagine the challenge, because what you have to do is if your manuscript is in plain text, the formatting instructions need to be in the manuscript. And so what you need is then a set of conventions around, well, what's italics? Italics is something surrounded by asterisks. What's bold? Bold is something surrounded by 2 asterisks. And then add on all the conventions for creating a book. Like, this is an index entry. How am I going to construct an index from a bunch of index entries? And you surround the index entry with a little instruction. And so that means we've got a technical specification for how to produce a book from a plain text manuscript. And for our translations, we use OpenAI's GPT 4.0 model via its API. And GPT knows our technical specification, which makes things a lot easier for translating and crucially producing the actual book files that you need in the end. And this is just incredibly useful. And so basically the way our translation works is it's like the first book, the English book, for example, is like a big puzzle that the process knows. It breaks it into parts, and each translation of each part is informed by knowledge of that whole.
Yep. Then from there, going into 31 languages.
Yep.
How were those chosen?
Just our 31 top selling languages. Nothing much more complicated than that. And in that sense, we're also very kind of lean. You know, we've been around for about 14 years, but we like to do things that way. Yeah.
And where you have the complete English manuscript in Markdown, where does it go from there? How long does it take?
For about a 40,000 word book, it would take a couple of hours. Because we can do things in parallel, doing the full 31 languages would take a couple of days.
Couple of days, which is nothing at all. So what kind of response so far? How many books? I think you've only done a handful of books so far.
Yeah, there's only been a handful of books done so far with kind of early adopter types. We had a professor who was interested in sort of accessibility from a language point of view, and he wanted a free book about how to be a data scientist available in dozens of languages. So he used our service for that. We had someone else who's got a very sophisticated book about, you know, basically being a sort of CTO of cloud platforms. And we were very happy that he used our process, and he had some success. It was very sort of fun, actually, sort of saying on his LinkedIn platform, hey, I've just got this book out in like 29 new languages, because he already had Japanese and Korean. And, you know, people were replying, oh, I'll buy the Hungarian version. Check it out. And they're like, hey, you know, paragraph 2, you know, this is a little funny, but I get it. And just very interesting interactions with readers like that.
And feedback. I mean, what's the first feedback from customers? Are you getting enough to understand whether the books are being appreciated, whether there's problems with the translations?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Since Leanpub is a self-publishing platform, most of the interaction happens between the author and the readers. And so the authors can actually get sort of chapter-specific, paragraph-specific feedback and go fix it, because people will help them translate their book once they realize this interaction between the author and and themselves is possible. Generally, the feedback is one is that because Leanpub books mostly so far are sort of prescriptive nonfiction and computer programming books and things like that, people are like, good enough is good enough for me. You know, if I'm being promoted, if I've got an interview being promoted to a new role tomorrow, if a book isn't perfect, or if I can tell, oh, the AI, you know, didn't understand what in your face means in my language, you know, they'll see what the mistake is and they'll be okay with it. So at that level of sort of very practical need, it's definitely the feedback is good enough.
One of the things I plan to do with my book is that I'll offer anyone who buys one of the foreign language translations, I'll offer the English book as well at half price, so that if they want to have both available and find in the translation something that just looks ridiculous, doesn't make any sense, I'm assuming that most of the readers and buyers of my book will also have English as a second language, and it will have some value to them to have the English book available for reference. Does that make any sense?
It does, yeah. That's something that we're having a back and forth with authors and then readers who they talk to. I think we're probably going to end up with a model. I mean, we give authors a lot of autonomy to choose what they want to do, but I think most authors are probably going to want to provide the original along with the translation for those reasons.
So Robert, you were aware of what they're trying to do there at Leanpub. Talk about it from your perspective.
No, I think it's a great service. I think it's different markets basically and different purposes. So I mean, for self-publishing and those kind of computer science and all of that, I think it sounds great. I don't think it would hold for a traditional book publisher hoping to get in kind of on a New York Times bestseller list without editing, but I mean, it's different markets.
What's from your experience, Robert? How many errors would there be, or how substantial might be the problem in the translation, given that no one in that language is going to be able to QC it?
I think our experience is that only about 20% of the sentences are not edited upon in any way. And they are usually the ones that are quite easy, like yes, ma'am, hello, sir, how are you doing? But as soon as it gets a little bit more complex, it becomes more difficult. And I think one way to think about it is that, as you mentioned, I mean, these models are probabilistic, right? So if you think of 10,000 sentences in a book, and each sentence you can go a little bit left or a little bit right, and you add those 10,000 on top of each other, you can end up far left or far right, and you can have two completely different stories. So it's a lot about, I think it's a difference in scale is a difference in principle. So, I mean, it can always look good if you look at a paragraph, but if you want the entire red thread and for it to be congruent, it's not there yet. Will it get better? 100%. The question is, how do we evolve over time with it? And will we ever end up in a situation where a big publisher dares to press a button without having anyone look at it before they start to market it? I think we're very far from there currently.
Where do you see your agency in 2 or 3 years?
I mean, we're growing fast. I think we'll continue to translate for more book publishers and have more translators who want to work with us. If we look at kind of from a quality perspective, then it's super difficult to gauge, and everyone wants kind of metrics for it, right? But what we look at is how do they fare in kind of public top lists, and looking at it, as we said, we started from the Nordics. Books we have translated are in kind of top list in Sweden, Denmark, Finland, Netherlands, and Germany. And then if you look at the reviews from them, none of them mention the translation, which for me is very good, because that means that the translation is good. If they would have mentioned it, I would have said that's fantastic.
Yeah. Good. Now, Brian, I've seen a lot of questions flipping through here, so why don't we move over to the questions and use those to keep the conversation going?
Sure. And maybe there were two kind of from early on that got echoed a number of times. The first was from Rachel asking a question about how does the use of AI affect copyright for translations? Does it limit what a publisher can claim? And I know that you're not legal experts nor approaching it from that standpoint, but what's your understanding?
Robert, do you have a take on that?
Yes, I mean, the copyright is, of course, super important for us and even more for the publishers. I think the fact that we're working over so many different countries, we work with freelancers in a bunch of countries and publishers as well. It's good to know that almost all Western copyright law stems from two conventions at the end of the 19th century in Europe, in Vienna and Paris in like 1880s. And that's why most of them look very similar. You have the economic right and you have the moral right. And in most countries, except the US, you can't transfer the moral right. So then what happens is that traditionally when you translate a book, the author has a copyright, and they sell a translation right, or the right to translate to another party. And traditionally, that right that is created is seen as a copyright in and of itself, but that is contingent upon the old copyright. Yeah. So the translator actually gets a copyright as well. So that's how it works. With AI, it's a bit more unclear, to be honest. Most jurisdictions don't have a clear view, but most say that it has to be a human being doing the translation, which in and of itself then means that the AI translation is not copyrighted. But with that said, it's still contingent on the author's original copyright. So it's not like you can't use the translation anyway.
Yeah.
But I think that this is a moving area, and I think it will change quite. We will see precedents that's going to happen.
Len, has that come up as a discussion point at Leanpub, the copyrightability of the translations?
Our position is that our authors own the copyright to the work that's produced by our AI service. And so anything else is between them and their respective governments. We, in other words, we make no claim on, we're not going to make any claim on the kind of copyright because they used us to translate the book. So that's the most straightforward answer I can give. But the rest of it is, yeah, going down to the sort of like legal principles and the way things are going to work out. It's a curious time.
Yeah. Well, let's leave it that it's ambiguous at this point, and we're waiting on a ruling from the Copyright Office for the U.S. Brian?
Thank you. And maybe, Robert, if you have a moment to just put into the chat the name of your company. It was one of the questions that we asked. So give you a few minutes to add that. And Len, if you go under chat and just select everyone so that everyone can see it. Jennifer was asking early on a practical question about protecting an author's manuscripts. So if you sell the translation and then the entity, a publisher in a different country, for example, contracts with a translator who then decides to feed it into ChatGPT or another engine, is there a risk of that? And is it, and what can either an author, an agent, or a publisher do to protect themselves against that?
Is that one you can take, Robert?
Sure. I mean, it will always be a risk, right? If you send a document to someone, you have no control over what they will do with it. The way we have it is that as we built our platform as something you log into and use through it, we send all the data to our sub-suppliers, right? So in that sense, we control it, but you can always have someone who copy pastes every sentence and send somewhere. I mean, it's you can't control somewhere in their home.
Yeah. Good.
The question probably at the intersection of the work that you do, Thad, from Laura is asking, how does AI translation affect publishing workflows? I mean, is it something you've given thought to?
No, is the answer on that. It's because I see it as a, after, because I have not conceived it as being within the existing workflow. I see it as after the fact. That's the way it works, with Leanpub, for example. All the work is done on the English language version of the book. When that's 100%, then it goes into the translation workflow. Len, is that how it works at Leanpub?
Yes, yeah. When you're done, you click the button and you get your translations.
Yeah, I think one thing, not to lead the witness, but one thing that Len might be able to talk to is to say a little bit more about the way that the manuscripts are structured in Leanpub. Perhaps one of the things is for publishers or authors who want to create more translations more or less seamlessly, that they're going to have to think about the structure of the document ahead of time. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. The thing is that, like, effectively the way we do it, the GPT-4o in a sense doesn't really know, but it knows this is a book because of the kind of structural elements. And so it sort of in a sense knows what a chapter heading is. It knows something's a subchapter. It knows there's an image here. It knows there's a table here. It knows, again, metaphorically, those things in the context of translating what's coming before and what's coming after, what's being referenced with cross links to later, things like that. So because our markdown for books called Markua, which if anyone wants to Google it, Google what is Markua, and you'll find an article I wrote on Medium explaining all of this and a little bit of fun history. But basically, yeah, because the AIs can read our technical book production specification, that means they can kind of understand the book production parts and differentiate those from the kind of content or body part of the book. And so all of that helps interact in the production of the translation in the end.
Brian, I'd like to just break in and show the 4 more slides, because there's something that I was doing in preparation for the webinar, having to do with AI and the audiobook translation. And I've been working with a company called 11 Labs, who do foreign language audiobook translations, and they have both a 100% machine system and then a human QA system. And so their process at this point looks potentially cumbersome. So I've been investigating what some of the other possibilities are. So I'll just share the screen for a moment, 4 slides. Here we go. So I just took this one. This is just the first opening paragraph of my book. And I just wanted to test it as a sort of translation chunk. And I put it into an English, French, and English to Spanish. So there's a different service that I was looking at yesterday, was able to take the English and go directly into Spanish audio.
It's been over a year and a half since the OpenAI introduced ChatGPT to a public mostly unfamiliar with artificial intelligence. Initially, it appeared to have no obvious relevance to book publishing. It's been over a year and it's been over.
So then I went to another service which was able to do French audiobooks. They want you to do the translation, of the book itself and then upload the French
Il s'est
version of the
écoulé plus
manuscript.
d'1 an et demi depuis qu'OpenAI a présenté ChatGPT à un public majoritairement non familier avec l'intelligence artificielle.
So quite amazing to me, because I'm only somewhat familiar with both languages, but it did sound to me like a reasonable voice for a translation.
Il s'est écoulé plus d'1 an et
Go there. So then I took the translation, the French translation, and threw that into ChatGPT and asked it to translate it back to English. And so this is the doc compare version, where you can see what the English was, and then it went into a second language and came back to a first language as a way to try and evaluate the quality. And it's a fun experiment that I would recommend to any of the people in the audience. Take an English text, put it into a second language, then pull it back from that language into the first language, and you'll have a sense of, of the quality of the translation. And in each of these points here, it's like, yeah, it works both ways. Work the original work. This is not a bad version of it. So that was quite pleasing to me. I'll stop sharing there. Back to some questions.
Well, there's one question that we had from also from Rachel was how accurately AI captures cultural considerations in translation. And there was a similar question with respect to regional and local dialects. I think, Len, you've probably given some thought to this, but maybe Robert, you as well.
Yeah, sure. This is an incredibly complex question. I mean, the old joke about how you can tell someone's accent, what sort of street they live on in London from their accent. The same at a granular level goes for colloquialisms and slang and things like that. And then you can go all the way up to kind of, to carry on with the English analogy, BBC voice. When you're talking about what's a cultural convention, well, depends on the context. And this is one of the things that makes translation such a wonderful, complex thing. And it's one of the reasons that, if you think translators disagree with what an AI did, ask them what another translator did with the same text and see how they react. It's just, and that's what makes it such an interesting thing. And I think it's the reason that translators are attracted to translating things. When it comes to the challenge, I think there's always going to be, and this is sort of, just the perspective we would give, there's always going to be feedback that you're going to want when you do something like this. If it's from a formal editor that you pay, if it's from crowdsourcing, which is basically the way Leanpub books are edited, that's probably what the future is going to be for those kinds of things. And we live in the world where you can sort of multiply your book with the sort of like copy paste, and you can have a new manuscript with a different colloquialism in it. So in the end, you could actually have translations down to the neighborhood level.
Robert?
No, I quite agree with that. answer. And I think, I mean, but at the same time, a big value add that we have as a service with working with all of these translator, editors, and proofreader is just that, to kind of pass it through the cultural lens and make sure that it's coherent throughout. Because I think that's a lot what we're missing when we have these conversations. It's the difference between looking at a paragraph and looking at a book. It's very different if it's 100 words or if it's 100,000 words. And we as humans and readers are very attuned to when things are not correct, in quotation mark. Yeah,
it was interesting with that in terms of the block of text in last month's webinar when we were talking about AI detection, and Max from what was it, Pan, whatever his company was called, the startup that was making the detection software. People were saying, well, can you put in a sentence and detect it? No, you can't. You know, one sentence standing alone. He was talking about having to have a minimum of 500 words as a sufficient sort of block of text to be able to detect within that whether AI had been used. And so when it comes to translation, you have to be thinking in terms of chunks, but also the work as a whole. And it fascinates me how you sort of dissect a work as you approach the translation challenge. Brian?
Not surprisingly, that we probably have more questions than we have time for today, but we will capture those and share them with the panelists today and see if there's anything that we can add in the follow-up that we give to everybody who's registered for this webinar. Jennifer had asked Robert if Nuanced is a closed AI or if it's open. I think that kind of going in line with that kind of concern about sharing manuscript and
right
then having it go out to the
it's closed, so we don't have it as a software as a service. It might change in the future, but right now it's closed.
Great, thank you. And Miguel had asked, can you translate directly from XML? Maybe this is something Len, has some experience with, because you kind of work really hard to promote a specific markdown.
I'm sure you could. We can't currently.
It wouldn't capture. You would lose the XML, right? You'd extract. It'd be a subset of the XML structure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
There was a question that for you from Barbara, just asking, how are you planning to market a book that is translated into 32 languages without a local affiliate or local publisher who might help you?
Yeah, that's been top of mind as well. When I think about the value proposition of having 32 languages, clearly it's not anywhere near what it would be like if I had publishers from 31 other countries approach me and offer to purchase rights. And it's not just because of the purchase, which would bring in a few shekels here and there. It would be their commitment to the book and their ability to promote it and distribute it in those markets. And so I won't have that ability. It won't be, it won't have any sort of local publicity. So when I think of the marketing of the book, it's going to be marketing the English language edition internationally. And when people come to Leanpub and see the book and see that it's also available in their language, because that's right there on the page, the English language page for the book, then my expectation is that people will go, oh, right, it's in Romanian, and so I will purchase that edition, $9.99. Oh, and I can get the English language version for, instead of $9.99, for half that price. And so I'll take the two editions. So I see it as, expanding on the English language market more than I see it as a true international sale in that respect. But it remains to be seen because, people aren't used to having the book available in their language simultaneous with the English language edition.
Can I have a
bring it
comment?
Back yeah, I was going to say we'll bring that back in a year and see how he says. but go ahead.
What are you saying, Robert?
No, I was just saying, if you look at the audiobook market, where I come from, basically constitute 50% of the book market, and most is the same in the Nordic languages. Traditionally, a publisher has always translated into their own language because they can distribute and promote. But now what we're seeing, we're helping some publishers who've traditionally only gone to Swedish, they now go to 10 different languages because they have the platform and the distribution and the promotion availability. So it brings, I think this, what's being opened up now actually makes for a completely new business model for a lot of the mature publishers and a different reach.
Fascinating.
So there's still work to be done in terms of promotion and discovery and purchase, but
A lot of work to be done.
The product.
And that platform issue is really important too. I reached out to Michael Tamblin at Kobo and said, Michael, I'm going to have 32 books I want to upload to Kobo, but I don't want to have to do 32 uploads with 32 ISBNs and create 32 pages, which will be even more unnavigable for readers. And he said, we're working on it.
Maybe not the 32 ISBN part. You may be stuck with that.
Yeah.
Jennifer had followed up just to ask Len if the Leanpub system is also closed.
In the sense that the our book processor, so the specification is completely public, so anyone could build their own processor. So our book production processor is based on that public text, but our book production processor is closed. And well, of course, GPT-4o is as open as it is when you use it. Our own internal prompt engineering and AWS step functions and all that kind of stuff is closed.
All right, thank you for that. Thad, if you have time for one more question, I can ask them and then we can wrap.
Sure.
So this is from Ruth, kind of following up on the copyright question that Rachel and some others posed. What concerns do you have putting copyrighted material into an AI translator? I mean, is this something that it's just buyer beware, or is there a different perspective that you bring to it?
Is that for me?
Working with ChatGPT these days, you can specify that it not go into the training set. But Len, that's perhaps a question for you.
Oh, I thought if it was a question for us, the only copyrighted work we're putting into the AI is the author's own copyrighted work that they own the copyright to. And as Thad said, you can choose not to share that with them for their own, building their model.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the same for us. It's very clear in many of the terms when they and when they do not use it to train general models. So I think it's very good to be mindful of that if you want to do it.
I find that authors and publishers there's a lot of confusion around this still, and a lot of apprehension that the work is being subsumed somehow into the corpus. But that is something that each of the companies is aware that they need to provide the option of not having the work go into the existing corpus.
Hey, thank you for that. There's a question that probably is mostly for me, which is from Christy, who's asking, does anyone know of a database that matches ISBNs for original works and translations? That essentially is a requirement for a work identifier, which has been tried twice in book publishing and has failed both times. It's not that we're giving up on work identifiers, but that's the thing that's needed to make those pieces fit together.
It can be specified in Onyx, right, Brian? But nobody does.
There are proprietary work identifiers. There's no universal. And so Penguin Random House, for argument's sake, may maintain a directory of its works in translations tied to the original, whatever the original language edition is. But that's not widely available. You couldn't do a study on it. You'd have to negotiate with a particular publisher for their proprietary information. Okay. Well, Thad, thank you very much. Len and Robert, thank you as well for participating in this session today. I think we've covered a lot of ground. I think there's still more to be done with this. And Thad, I think you started by talking about the first two sessions, the one we did last month on detecting AI and this month on translations. we're anticipating coming back in the fall to maybe not always on Thad's shoulders, but hopefully he'll continue to provide a steady hand. But we anticipate continuing this series in the fall. It's going to take July and August to figure that out, starting I guess on Thursday night, and then we'll go from there. But do look for announcements from us if you're interested in this topic of AI in book publishing, and we'll continue to talk about it throughout the fall.
And this will be, the recording should be available in about a week, Brian, would you say?
Yeah, that would be great. We have to head out the day on Thursday to go to the American Library Association's annual meeting, so we may be a day or two later than that, but we'll try our best.
And that'll be on YouTube. And how can we get the slides to people?
If you provide the slides to Brooke, we will share them as part of the email that goes out to everybody.
Great.
Thad and panelists, just send me any materials you want distributed, and I'm more than happy to make sure that they're received by everybody.
That's great, Brooke. Thank you. Good.
Right,
Well,
thanks
thank
to
you. Thanks, guys, for joining us. Robert from far away. Thanks for coming in, and
Thanks very
talk
much.
to you again soon.
Have a good afternoon or good evening.
Bye-bye.